Today, we're going to paint a beautiful still life. Let's call it Strawberries in a Jar. We'll also discuss how to depict glass, which looks impressive, but is actually simpler than it seems at first glance. I'll explain everything step by step. Let's start with the drawing. The most challenging part, in my opinion, is sketching the jar. Let's simplify it. First, we'll draw a cube. The cube will have a top, and here we can place 2 strawberries. Something like this, very simple. To turn our cube into a jar, we need to find the centre. This centre will serve as the axis of symmetry, along which we will open up the oval of the jar. Now, the jar isn't exactly square, it's slightly rounded at the bottom. So we'll also curve this oval. You can start outlining from both sides to make it more accurate, but we won't see this side of the jar. Do the same at the top, keeping the distances roughly equal. Actually, it's best if the distances are exactly the same. Indicate the height of the jar's neck. As for the neck, I first draw a full circle to help me later show these edges, because we need to make the glass visible going back there. We'll also confirm the shape here, making sure the curves are roughly parallel. If you think of them as arcs, the arcs should also be parallel. And there's our jar. Now, step back and check if everything looks symmetrical and clean. Then erase any unnecessary lines. Next, we'll place the strawberries. I can say that the jar was the hardest part of the drawing. The rest will be easier. Before placing the strawberries, let's mark the thickness of the glass here where it curves. You may also want to show some threading on the glass. Now let's add the strawberries. We have one here, right in front of us, and another behind it. Be careful not to squash the strawberries. After all, strawberries are firm and we don't want them looking dented. Look here, this part of the glass curves back, and you can even add a little stem with leaves here. There are also 2 more strawberries, one right here. Something's sticking out too much here, but it's not too important how they are positioned exactly. What matters is that they overlap each other, giving the sense of volume, that they all fit inside the jar. Let's sketch a few more berries inside. For example, one here, another there, and you can show a few leaves. It won't be clear where exactly the other berries are. At the front, we need a nice strawberry here, with another one poking out from behind it, partially hidden by the jar. Notice that the berries don't line up perfectly. They overlap each other naturally. One is behind the other, tucked away. Now, we'll refine the details of the jar's rim. To draw the lid, I recommend pausing the video to take a closer look at the metal lid's pattern and observe the grooves. Pay attention to the angle of the lid because it shows the jar's tilt and confirms its position. There's a definite angle here. Pay attention to this wire. It disappears behind the lid, wrapping around the neck of the jar. There are 2 loops here with the wire threaded through them. If it feels too complicated, you can skip drawing the wire, but I encourage you to give it a try. Even if it doesn't turn out perfect, the attempt matters. I was working from a reference photo, but if you have your own jar, and even better, your own strawberries, then you're all set. You can follow along with this masterclass, then set up your own still life and paint from life.
To you I wrote my life, but before I sent it you were far away. The song can never reach you.
Before we start working with colour, let's talk about the palette we'll use. I'll show you the main colours now. Of course, we'll need red, various shades of red. You can use scarlet or any bright red. For the yellow, I'll be using a lemon yellow, but honestly, any yellow will work. Just make sure it's diluted. I'll also be using burgundy, which I achieve by using the same red but in different dilutions, varying the intensity from light to deep tones. I'm using carmine, but you can take any red, mix it with a little green or even brown to get a nice burgundy shade. For the greens, I mix my own shades rather than using a pure green. I combine blue and yellow, or light blue and yellow, to create various yellowish-green hues. In some areas, we'll also add a touch of blue, especially in the glass. There will be hints of blue in the glass, but only a little, in small areas. The metal part of the jar will also have a slightly bluish tint. Finish your drawing, and then we'll move on to colouring. I'll start with the furthest strawberry. I'll erase some of the pencil lines now to lighten them up so they don't stand out too much. We can start colouring from the top using lemon yellow, working with a very watery wash. I'll be applying colour to the strawberries with light, quick strokes, leaving small gaps between colours. Then I'll switch to a scarlet red, using light, twisting strokes to create bright spots. Since this berry is further away, it will be lighter and less contrasted. Next, I'll move on to the burgundy. I don't fill the berry entirely with dots. Some areas are left empty. I tone down the brightness a bit so that the berry doesn't stand out too much. Now I move on to the side strawberries, and the process here is the same. Start with a bit of yellow, using a diluted version since this pigment is quite strong. Then I'll apply red to the highlighted areas with rough strokes, leaving small gaps. Friends, thank you for watching this video. This video is part of my paid lessons, which you can access through Patreon or directly from my website. Thank you for your support. I'm also grateful for any donations, and even if you're not ready for paid lessons, but enjoy my videos and want to support the channel, you'll find ways to do so in the channel description. Continuing with the lesson, let's mix some blue and yellow for the leaves, and you can add a bit of orange for a more natural green. In the shadows, use a darker bluish tone. Moving on to the jar's neck, we'll add little white highlights for the reflections of the glass. We'll leave this edge white to show the glass's thickness, and here we'll add lines that imitate the jar's neck. I'll use a mixed colour, not a pure scarlet like before, but a mid-tone I've mixed on my palette, combining scarlet and burgundy to create a balanced colour. I'll first paint the entire neck with this shade. The highlights should follow the curve of the neck, wrapping around just like the jar itself. There's no need to copy every detail exactly. Just keep in mind that the lines are denser here and gradually fade into the shadow with fewer stripes. You can also leave some streaks to show texture. Now, we can darken the colour in some areas with burgundy and add shading to the glass. For the highlights, I'll add a slight yellow tint, and along the edges, just a hint of blue. I'll tone it slightly with a soft pink to give it complexity. You can even add a bit more blue here for depth, and mix in a touch of burgundy to create a reflection from the berries. It's starting to look quite beautiful. Let's add a few more blue streaks here, and then move on to the strawberries inside the jar. We'll begin with the central berries we outlined earlier. To show the transparency of the glass, we'll use a few key techniques. For example, we can blur parts of the strawberry that press against the glass, using the same colours but making them soft and smudgy. As we move toward the edges, we'll continue with the same method we used for the berries on top, making light, broken strokes, working from red to burgundy. Here, we'll leave a bright highlight to indicate the reflection on the glass. Right now it looks a bit unclear, but don't worry, we'll add more detail to make it all come together. Next to it, we'll add another berry, and for this one, we'll introduce a bluish tint, as if the glass is slightly fogged or reacting to the berry inside. We'll continue applying the same technique here at the bottom, creating that frosted glass effect. Now, let's add a little colour. Not too much, just enough to keep the surface wet. Then we'll introduce a soft blue inside the wet paint, letting it gently push the red outward, creating the illusion that the berries are inside the jar. The blue shouldn't blend completely with the red, but rather nudge it so we get a sense of depth, like the berries are positioned within the jar. As we move on, I'll add some more details to another berry later, but I'll explain that in a moment. For now, I'll refine the remaining berries. These don't need a clear shape. They'll just appear as a dark, indistinct mass inside the jar. The last berry we'll focus on is the one that has a more defined shape, which we'll highlight with a bright white spot here to show the reflection. We'll do the same thing here, using dark colours, gradually softening the edge of the jar. Be sure to leave a white strip along the jar's edge for the glass. Later we'll carefully outline the jar with a fine brush, blending the edge smoothly with blue. There will be some bright spots here, and over here as well, some soft faded light areas. In contrast, there will be darker burgundy tones.
우리 다시 돌아갈까 돌아갈까 너무 많이 돌아왔나 돌아왔나
I want to add a bit more depth here because the current look reminds me a bit too much of mould, but we'll fix that. I'll add some greenery to make it clear that this isn't jam, but strawberries in a jar.
잊고 살았던 게 너무 많은데
almost done. For the bottom of the jar, you can paint it with a soft yellow, especially if the jar is sitting in sunlight, giving it a glowing effect. Now we need to make this front strawberry really vibrant since it's the closest to us. Don't hold back on the red. The most illuminated part can even be a bit bolder. These stripes will get closer together as they move away, with the brightest section right here.
핸드폰 속에 너와 나눴던 얘기들은 아직 남아 꿈만 속에 꿈이 아니겠지 꿈이었어도 나 헤어나오지 못했어
For the metal part, I'll use a greyish-blue tone, applying 2 layers, one lighter and one darker, outlining one side of the metal with a fine brush. I'm being careful not to touch the wet strawberry. You can also trace the edge of the jar lightly with the same colour we used for the highlights. Otherwise, the pencil lines may disappear completely. And that's pretty much it. It's important to make sure the jar's curves are more rounded. Mine looks a bit too flat, so I'll fix that.
You know what have I done to you? I wrote my life, but before I sent it, you were far away. The song can never reach you. 이 노래 듣게 된다면 예민해졌어. The song can never reach you. 아무 일도 없던 그대로.
Our jar is done. See, nothing too complicated. Just make sure your jar is drawn accurately. If something looks a bit off, like mine does, it's easy to correct by showing the thickness of the glass through reflections and light. A great tip is to photograph your work because you can often spot issues more clearly in a photo. Oh, one more thing. I forgot to mention the option of adding a background to this composition. Personally, I wouldn't, as it might make the whole thing look heavier, but you could add a few leaves or branches if you like. And we're done. This lovely jar is complete. Give it a try and send in your work. See you at the next masterclass. Goodbye.